I would like to welcome you all back to Rumors in the Mist. I am your host, Morgan. Sadly, today Talon cannot join us, so it's just going to be you and me. We're talking about the second half of Mistborn, The Final Empire, which is the first book in Brandon Sanderson's trilogy. So, for the highlights of the second half, we get more character in depth with Kelseir and Vin, and of Elend, of course. A lot more of Elend. Now, I can't remember if we discussed Elend in the last podcast. Elend is a nobleman. A nobleman who is not a fan of the Final Empire. He himself is in a small group of noblemen of the new generation, if you will. Vin's generation. And he's also like 4 years older than Vin, and Vin's at like that weird age where it's like, because she's in love with him and he's in love with her, like, by legal standards, would that be considered pedophilia? We aren't sure. It's not made clear about their laws, so we're gonna ignore that part. But he's really not a fan of the Final Empire and of the Lord Ruler. So he is a part of this underground group trying to convince other noblemen to cause an uprising or go against the Lord Ruler. And we find this out from one of his books that Vin reads that is mysteriously labeled as Weather of the Final Empire, and goes into discussion of why the Lord Ruler sucks. So that was a really funny thing. And Vin only looked at his books because she was curious what he was reading, and also because Shan, his ex-fiance, was trying to off him, if you will. So, some of my favorite parts has to do with Elend and Vin. Particularly when Vin's deception, her main source of power, and her tools to get what she needs and wants. Through her survival instincts, but not so much her survival instincts, because she gets so used to being a noblewoman that she forgets half the things that made her skilled and forgot how to use her skills that she had to use when she was living on the streets. She still knows them. It's just harder for her to comprehend it. And that would be when he finds out that she was deceiving him this whole time and is not a noblewoman, but is in fact a ska. Yeah, he still loves her, but he breaks her heart and says they can't be together, and he tries to push her away. Now, this just reinforces to Vin that her fear that Reen instilled in her when she was young, that everyone's gonna abandon her eventually, just gets worse. But in Elend's case, he's looking at it from, oh my gosh, what? I fell in love with this person, and this person was lying to me this whole time. Anything they said was true. Which I think is valid. At some point, deceiving people will get you so far. But it's also gonna hurt and destroy trust in the end once the truth comes out. No matter what the reason is. Unless if they decide that you are deceiving somebody else and they're in on the game. And Elend even didn't seem to really want to end it. It's more of, it just caught him off by surprise that he's not sure what to do. And part of me thinks that he tried to push her away in the effect of trying to get her out of the noble circle. So if it was ever found out, she'd be less likely to be murdered because, anybody who has allomancy and is ska is gonna get murdered. Yeah. Also, when Vin realizes that copper burning does not make you invisible, which was really, really heartwarming for me because it doesn't necessarily make Mare not, like, doesn't prove to us that she did not betray Kelseir, but a lot less likely. So that was very nice for Kelseir on some level, knowing the possibility that even if the Lord Ruler found them out because of her using elemancy while burning copper, it might not have been her intention to betray him. Also, it causes this really cool loophole, which we sort of get in the middle of the book, where Vin feels her emotions being messed with as she's burning copper when they are near the Lord Ruler's keep. And this shows us that it's not only burning metal. You can have a bunch of metal and burn it. But you have to have the skill to use that metal properly. The cleverness of making it most effective. And also the fact that it's about strength and inner strength. All the metals are like this, it seems. Copper for making you invisible and not being, like, felt or tampered with for the most part. The stronger you are, the more you can dampen it. Pewter, knowing when to use it so you don't get dragged so much that you die. And we learn a bit of these nuances throughout the book. And that, I find that really neat. I really like his magic system. Brandon Sanderson's magic system is the best. Well, maybe not the best, but I would say it's better than Harry Potter's. I wasn't the biggest fan of Harry Potter's, and not so much when it comes to Percy Jackson. The Percy Jackson was more powers that you inherit, which is like this, but it was specifically tied to the god. But there never really seems to be much wear on the characters themselves, versus here where you can see it is physically taxing. It's really hard to be overpowered, it seems. Vin is slightly overpowered, but she also doesn't exactly know how to use her powers yet. While we see other characters that seem overpowered, but we can still see them as mortal. The main character that's actually overpowered is Lord Ruler, the main antagonist. My least favorite moment in the book? Oh, thanks for that question. This sounds really bad. I don't like character deaths that much. I can live with them. They don't make the book less exciting. And sometimes they're very much needed, and this one was needed. I just felt really sad when it happened. When Kelseir was murdered by the Lord Ruler. It was like a rug was ripped out from underneath. I know he was planning on dying like that whole time, but it's at the same time it's like Lord Ruler murders Kelseir. Kelseir knows he was gonna die, but Kelseir still put up with everything. Kelseir had gotten so far from, like, escaping Hathsin, destroying all the crystals in Hathsin, getting rid of Atium for the next few centuries, all because he sort of broke. Actually, I think him breaking was my least favorite moment. It was probably the most important part of the book, but it was my least favorite because Kelseir just cannot catch a break, and he felt like he was alone. He had, like, no family left. Truthfully, he had none. Metaphorically, he had quite a bit. His crew wasn't necessarily his family, though they all sort of acted like it. You know, Doxson being like his best friend, Breeze being like that one uncle or cousin who just acts like they're too cool, but and teases you. But once you really get to know them, you're, like, really close, and, like, they wouldn't really let anything happen to you. But Kelseir lost his actual family. Mare and his last family member we know of surviving. Because we aren't sure about his dad. His mom, it seemed like she died when they were young. So, probably when their father realized she was a ska, he probably had her killed. Or, well, not Kelseir, his dad. I can't remember. I read that a bit ago. But the fact that when he finds Marsh's body completely mutilated and dead, and he's covered in Marsh's blood, that's his last blood relative. Mare, his wife, that I don't know if he realized Marsh had a crush on. It was pretty clear, in my opinion, based on how Marsh discussed him. Even before Vin mentioned he had a look as if he was a man in love, but the words were pretty clear that he had a thing for Mare. I don't know if Kelseir ever realized this. It doesn't appear he did. But after losing Mare and Hathson, watching her die right in front of his eyes, and that's what caused him to snap and get these powers. It was losing Marsh that he decided to finally do what he always planned on doing, getting rid of the gems in Hathson. But the crystals themselves and the geodes, he was always planning on doing, but he never felt comfortable on doing it, because in a way it seemed he felt like he had something to live for in case if anything went wrong. But after Marsh died, it's like all that got thrown out the window. He was a broken man and was like, this was just a push I needed to do this. I was going to do it at some point in time, but I never knew the time. This feels like it. I want to hit him where it hurts. I don't care if I get injured. I want to make them suffer for making me suffer. Because he felt like he had nothing left to live for. He had no family left. Which is very interesting because, to be honest, I always saw Vin sort of as his daughter. And all of this, he tells her that he once thought about, he's glad that he and Mare never had children, because if they did, they probably would have been murdered. But at the same time, the way he talks, the way he eggs her on, it's not like having an older sibling, but more of like father or uncle figure to Vin. And yeah, he's sort of like her father figure the entire time. She's never had a father figure in her life. Then she has Kelseir. And he sees sort of everybody who is Ska as a part of his children or family, as Vin describes him. That he has love for all the Ska, like when they're visiting the tenements. But it's not like peer to peer. It is he views them as beneath him, but not like underclass, but rather he sees him as a protector and father figure or a parent figure, and those are his children, and he needs to help raise them so that they will raise up for themselves and defend themselves. And he's her teacher and mentor. He teaches her how to use allomancy. And everybody leaves Vin in the end, it seems. At least to Vin. And for him to be there that long without leaving, never telling her that he will leave, and creating such close bonds, he practically is a father to Vin, whether he knows it or not, or accepts it, or realizes it. So it hurts her even more when he dies. Because as she said, Reen told her he was gonna leave. Kelseir just lied to her face. And I think part of the reason why he lied was because he knew it was gonna happen, but he didn't want to tell her, because he saw her as his child. And when you're a parent, you don't want to tell your kid, there's going to be a time when you have to live without me. There's going to be a time when I'm no longer going to be around. Because he didn't really want that to be true. He wanted to be alive and help others, but he knew he couldn't. For his plan to work, he knew he had to die, and he could not bring himself to tell Vin that he was going to sacrifice himself so that the Ska had something to rise up for and had the will to fight on. And that just really messes up Vin and tears her apart, because she feels truly betrayed, because his whole thing is trust. And when, as I said before, deception breaks all trust you have. She wasn't in that loop, so she didn't know that plan. And yes, he was always hiding something. And yes, she did feel like she was the kid in it. As in, no one was always letting her in the loop. And she knew that these guys are good at deceiving because they're one of the best crews out there. But at the same time, she's the deceiver. She's the trickster. For someone to out-trick her, it would have to be a lot, even since she figured out and realized with just learning allomancy more nuances than even Kelseir, who was the only other Mistborn in the group. And he's had it for, like, at this point, 2-3 years? Well, 2 years on her, at least. That she didn't think she could be deceived by him. And when she realizes that the deception was so great, and she realized that she let herself get close to not only Elend, who broke her heart, but also to Kelseir, who just betrayed her trust by doing the Reen thing of leaving her, but in a more permanent way than Reen. Reen just seems to have disappeared one day into the mist. So she could always find Reen if she wanted to. She could try. But since Kelseir's no longer on this mortal plane and Kelseir is permanently gone, there is the ultimate betrayal, the ultimate being left. Her mother left because she was mad, and it might be as close to as she's gotten. But this is so major because her mother was never really her mother, if that makes sense. She never really saw her as her mother figure. Reen took her away when she was super duper young. And based on how her mother is described, it doesn't sound like she's a good mom. She sounds crazy, deranged, crazy, and incapable of taking care. However, Kelseir actually put time and effort to care and nurture her. So she created a closer bond to someone who's not of her blood, but if the term blood is thicker than water, then this was, like, probably syrup. Because this was thicker than blood. This was trust he built. It was slight manipulation, but not because he really wanted to manipulate her, but because he wanted to help her. And then for her to see him sacrifice himself like that and leave her in a more permanent fashion than she was ever expecting really hurt who she was and just reinforced her thoughts. So, since we're on the topic of Vin, let's continue with Vin. So, where we left off, we know that Vin was having trouble. Oh, wait. Yeah. Vin was having trouble with the deception. Not that it was hard, but she was becoming so much and acting so much as Lady Vallete. She was having a hard time separate herself from Vallete. She was becoming Vallete. And it's not method acting at that point. She has a new personality, a new life. And it's not something she can go back to. It's sort of like a book I really like called Bloom Into You, but we're not talking about that this time. So, this really gets nudged into more in the second half, where we know her survival skills. We see it. In the first half of the book, she's still yearning for some things more than her being Lady Vallete. But as time goes on, she gets so used to being Lady Vallete, she forgets what it's like and where she came from. She doesn't remember living in something like the tenements, which are like the hideouts. And she's disgusted by it. And then she realizes, wait, this used to be my life. This could have been me. Have I really become so blind to other people just as the other noble men and noble women? And then when she gets captured by inquisitors and her medal is stripped away from her, she doesn't know what to do. She used to be so clever and can think like 20 different ways of escaping. She maybe couldn't always get away, but there's a good chance she probably could have. Given some of it may have been due to a little bit of trace metals in her water and utensils, but for the most part, it was her thinking on her feet. It was her survival skills. And she gotten so used to being a noble woman that she just no longer had those skills. Or at least not so quickly accessible because she didn't need it. It's like a muscle. If you don't exercise that muscle, it will slowly go away until you don't have it anymore, or it's just no longer as strong. Or flip that, reverse it. No longer as strong, or it goes away completely. That's why in space you have to exercise. And then later, when her deception is found out by Elend, that she is not of noble blood, he breaks things off with her. This, like, sort of tears her apart. She feels so angry and so sad and so mad about it. She doesn't know what to do. But she also doesn't want to see him get hurt. She knows that Shan's up to something because of Shan asking her to spy on Elend for her. For Shan to be trying to sneak into Elend's books, and that's how she found out. That's how Vin found out that he wanted to cause an uprising. All of this leads to her knowing that Shan's gonna try to do something. And it turns out she was right. Shan was gonna murder him. She found out about it, and she took care of Shan and murdered Shan. And then left her at Venture's keep. Partially because she had to get away and make sure she was safe. But at the same time, she wanted to protect the person who she loved, even though he broke her heart. And it wasn't about getting revenge. It was just about keeping a loved one safe. I hate when that happens. And then she later meets up with the group, and all of them are wondering why she messed up, why she screwed up the entire ploy that they've been working on this whole time. And when she reveals it's for the nobleman she's in love with, they all start laughing at her. They don't understand why. Because to them, he's a nobleman. Why would they be interested in saving him whenever nobleman is the cause, root strife for all of the Ska? For them, the whole reason why they're doing this is to overthrow the government and therefore also overthrow all the noblemen. It just doesn't make sense to them. And I bet you Spooks was not the biggest fan of that, knowing that the whole thing got messed up because Vin wanted to save the love of her life, especially since he sort of proposed a courtship to her, and she rejected him because she was in love with Elend and not him. He definitely was not the biggest fan whenever she was discussing it with him. We could see his awkwardness, and then he gives her some useful hints about being a Tenai. But at the same time, it's just not the same as, like... It's like when somebody says, it's not you, it's me. At some point, I think deep down, even if we know it's true, it's the other person, not you. You want to know why the other person doesn't, like, see you qualified as what you see them qualified as. Did you mess up somehow? What does this other person have that you don't? In Spook's case, it might be because Elend is of higher rank, or it could just be because Elend was sort of a real smooth talker without necessarily trying to be. And Spooks fell in love with somebody above his rank in society. Sort of like in Love and Time of Cholera, but I'm not going in depth in that one, so yeah. Because of those differences in class and in society, it's not made clear to Spooks why Vin doesn't love him back. But the fact that she still asked to keep his handkerchief because she found it very cute, I think is just toying with his emotions. And Vin, that was a very bad move. Don't do that to a guy. No. But yeah. Oh. Any major plot points? I'm seeing this in the chat. Yeah, so major plot points. The 11th metal and gold. Personally, when they said based on your history, this is how you could have turned out to be, I actually think that's not what those medals do. I think those medals reveal who you are on the inside, like your true self. Like when she looks at the 70-year-old man, but she burns the 11th medal, she sees a guy similar to who killed Kelseir, who she knows is Lord Ruler. She's looking at the Lord Ruler right now, who's like 70-something. And so that doesn't make sense. I think it is how he perceives himself and his sort of like true form. Also, I'm pretty sure the Lord Ruler is a part Terraceman based on some of his logbook entries, especially about being how one of the Terracemen doesn't like him because he's not a pure Terraceman. And so if that was the reason why he hated Terraceman, was because he was only partially one. And he rose up higher, and he has to make sure the earth and men continue to live on for, like, eternity. But people thought he was unqualified because he wasn't a full Terraceman. Maybe he might try to hide it, and that he is part Terraceman, which would make sense of how Allomancy might be, because Allomancy is burning metals, while Terracemen have, I forget what it's called, but it's a different kind of power, using metals to store magic and energy and power. but you have to like make your own. I have a feeling that that's one of the reasons why the Lord Ruler is so powerful, because he has not one but sort of two. He may have figured out a way to create allomancy from this other type of magic system that the Terracemen only have access to, because he found out of that because he's part Terraceman, and he was a part of the big prophecy. Bum bum bum. And when someone came against him, because they were like, you're not full Terraceman, you're not worthy of the title, he wanted to take it out on the others. So as long as he hides that he's not that, there shouldn't really be an issue. It would also make sense why the Inquisitors are more powerful and they have metal spikes going through their heads. That would be a part of their bodies, and if they made that like as their iron reserves and put the iron spikes in them, they could be saving up energy that they're not only burning metals, but storing like extra strength from pewter by not using it in their little ice spike sockets that they can draw on later. And I wonder if that's actually how the Lord Ruler makes himself younger. I can't remember if the Lord Ruler has any jewelry on, but I could have sworn he does. So if he does have any metal jewelry on him, if he has control and is able to use both kinds of powers, then he might have reserved a lot and only taps into it to make himself unage when he really needs it. It's not so much of him living forever at this point, though, than it is conserving so much of his energy that he physically ages, and then spreading it out for long periods of time. Or it might be a combination of all three. We still don't know how he's like practically immortal. We know the Inquisitors aren't immortal because Kelseir kills one by popping off their head. I wonder if anybody's tried... Oh no, somebody tried to burn the Lord Ruler alive. I don't know if anybody's tried popping off his head. Maybe it's popping off his head that they're missing. But as I was saying, I think it shows them their true self. Especially if the 11th metal was a gold alloy. That would show... Because, okay, it seems that the pure metals are the internals. That lets you be inside yourself. Or, not internals, but like pulling versus pushing. So, if pure is pulling, then Vin would have the pulling metal of gold to see her true self. It pulls her own true self to the forward and into a realm she can see. And if it's a version of a gold alloy that Kelseir believed to be the 11th metal, it might push on other people for you to see who they truly see themselves as, or who they are. Because when Vin burned gold, it was sort of two possibilities, yes. But in particular, it was as who she saw herself as. The kid who never trusts anybody. Younger than she actually is. But she always sees herself as this child who only sees the negative things in the world, who is scrawny and skinny and sort of starving. Because that's her internal image of herself before she joined this group. Or as Lady Vallete, where she looks like to be 21, 20. Somewhere around legal age. Bit closer than the other kid who's like 12. She sees herself as this because to her Vallete presumes more confidence. Vallete appears older. And higher ranking, she just exudes this more powerful feeling. All decked out in jewelry well, not decked out, but like jewelry, wealthy, well fed. Very different from how she used to see herself, and still sort of does. At some internal level, she sees two different versions of herself because she's deceiving everyone around her and herself. So there are two versions of her. Her Vallete, which is a deception, and the kid who, in her mind, is sort of the real her. And at this point, neither are her. She's a weird combination of both and neither at the same time. So if this is the case, and the 11th medal is a pushing medal and not actually gonna kill anybody, the Inquisitor, because there was a Steel Inquisitor holding her back, and next to the Steel Inquisitor emerged a nobleman who looked like he used to be a merchant. I'm pretty sure all Inquisitors and Obligators are in some way noblemen, or of noble descent, because they can't be Scars. Scars would get murdered. If you are Mistborn or are missing of any form, you're more likely to be an Inquisitor. So it only makes sense for nobles to be that way. So the merchant, it may have been the life of that guy before he became an Inquisitor. That's his true self. Underneath the spikes and the cloaks and the tattoos, he was this man. And for the Lord Ruler, he's not fancy. He has like some metal jewelry. So that shows us that he probably can have access at some point to some of the Terracemen powers of, not Allomancy, but the other one. As I said, I forgot the name. But it's how he sees himself. So this is probably before he became too judgmental of the world. This was him being worried. This was him on his quest to fulfill the prophecy and save the human race, or their version of the human race. Because, yeah, Brandon Sanderson seems to be like either writing in a different universe that's very similar to ours, or it's ours in the very, very, very far future. We somehow get genetic mutations to use metal as a source of magical powers, which both are very interesting. Now, I don't know how we would get those magical metal powers, but if anybody does know, I would love to find out, because magic's awesome. But he sees himself as not this powerful person, but rather this normal, well-off person. Like, not the coolest person around, not a literal god, or a metaphoric god, but as this normal man, this normal, like, young man on a journey to do something. Not too fancy, but he has resources he needs. He's not starving, he's well fed. He's just your average Joe. And based on his logbooks, we could see the Lord Ruler as some people think he's really self-centered, but as Vin, and I think Vin's right, he's not really self-centered, but he's really worried that he's putting on a charade for everybody else, and that somebody will realize it. So the gold alloy shows you his version that he sees himself as. The person that he was fearful. The main part of his memory. That was his past. That is who he is underneath the supposed immortality and being invincible. That is who he is. And if that is all a charade, or if that's his actual true self, and he's just not lived for so long, that his true self doesn't exist anymore because that's how he sees himself and he deceived himself that over all these years he's no longer recognizable as the man he used to be. That gold alloy, if it is in fact a gold alloy, would explain why we see this man. And yeah, the themes of deception is trickled out throughout this book. Because as we said, Vin is one of our main characters. That is her source of power. And with deception comes in the counter argument as trust. If you build trust with someone, there's no need to deceive them. And even sometimes Vin breaks her own rule about never trusting anybody. She trusted, or at some point in a way, she trusted that Kelseir wouldn't leave her. She got too used to him being there. In fact, that's part of the reason why she became an assassin. Because she felt like she lost everybody, and that what's similar to probably how Kelseir felt whenever he lost Marsh. She went through a similar thing. No one's left for me, everybody's gonna leave me eventually. Why would I try to fit into a society like this when I can just cause issues and get what I need to? And that is why she becomes an assassin and tries to kill the Lord Ruler himself. And Kelseir, his whole thing is about trust. But even he deceives people. Even if it's like slightly intentional and is for the right reasons, he still deceives them. Like with Captain Demure, who is a part of the Ska Rebellion. He deceived the entire Ska Rebellion and Eden, which eventually got like over 3/4 of the men killed, and everybody they recruited for the whole charade, because he promised them help that was outside of their own natural world type thing. But it was because he deceived everybody, and what he was thinking was a white lie, because at the core it should be true. But because he did that, people misinterpreted and thought they were more powerful than they were. And that ended up with like 12,000 men killed. Slain by garrisons and soldiers of the Lord Ruler. But even then, towards the end, it was about trust. Kelseir trusted the men he had signed up for it. He trusted that they would, after he died, they would try to follow through and finish out the plot. Or that he trusted his plan that even if they didn't, it would still come to fruition. As long as Lord Renew did his part. He trusted that Vin would make the right decision. And he trusted himself that he knew what he was doing, and that all of his work and his self-sacrifice would not go for a loss. So we see these two main characters, Vin and Kelseir, take a bit from the other person's book without realizing it, and eventually getting hurt in a way that they did not originally think was possible, but it also allowed them to grow more as characters. They started pulling on a different source of power. Even if it was for a very short period of time, they were able to expand what they were able to do with their opportunities. Now, these opportunities weren't always the best or the best decision, but they were a new opportunity. As for what I would rate this book, I would definitely give it a 5-star read. I'm giving it because it's just a really well thought out world. I really want to read books 2 and 3 to just see how the story continues on. And to be honest, I really, really want to know what happens to like the Elend and Vin love thing. Will Elend accept Vin as Vin, or will he still call her Vallete? Will, since Vin wants to be an assassin now and exact revenge, and she feels hurt by Elend because Elend broke up with her because he found out that she's Ska, even though he talked about how he sort of loves the Ska. He's fascinated by the Ska. How does that affect how she sees him as a person now? And will, if that does happen, if they do still end up together, would Elend be loving her, or be loving her because he's fascinated by her? I feel like that's would be a very interesting thing to see more from with Vin and Elend, how each of them interprets the other, and also just how far the rebellion gets, how far the noble wars get, and if the final empire will actually fall. But yeah, the magic system was really well thought out. I got lost in the book so many times. Sometimes I would rewind it because there was so much information that I could not get enough of it. But I was also missing half of it, so I had to go back and re-listen because there was so much in there. It is so well thought out. It's like not hard to understand, but it just takes you into another world. It's better than Percy Jackson, in my opinion. And I really love Percy Jackson. So that's saying something. Well, yeah. That's it. Bye, guys. And hey, if you have any more book suggestions, put it in the comments. If we continue with this series, I'll be over the other 2 books. Maybe going more depth in the magic system and characterizations for similar, and if you like this series, click that subscribe button and give us a like. And hopefully next time Talon will be able to rejoin us. And today Talon didn't because Talon wasn't feeling the greatest. I think he got food poisoning, or maybe just got really sick. There's been bugs growing around, stomach bugs. And for our first video, click that small box in the corner. It'll send you right there. And well, we don't have a Patreon, but we're setting up one soon because this takes a while and need money to access the other 2 books so we can read them. And hopefully we will be doing more things. And if you want to support us and support what we do, like our movies, and doing more of these or similar things, or maybe doing animatics, we would really love your guys' support. See you next time when we're wandering through the mists. Bye!